Good evening, everyone. May I please invite to the stage our speaker for tonight, Professor Erik Brødsgaard. Our chair for the evening, Professor Patricia O'Brien. And Professor Sanjay Kumar, Director at CSDS.
Good evening, friends. On behalf of Center for the Study of Developing Societies and Institute for Chinese Studies, I welcome you all to the 12th Giri Memorial Lecture. The lecture was instituted in the name of Professor Giri Deshingkar. And what's this connection between Giri Deshingkar, ICS and CSDS? We have been organizing this event for the last 12 years. This is the 12th annual lecture. Professor Giri Deshingkar was a professor at CSDS, and he also served as the director of CSDS between 1987 and 1992. During his stay at CSDS, when he was a professor at CSDS, he had a deep interest in studying China. So what he did, started a group to study China, and the group grew, and slowly and gradually, at one point of time, the China Study Group actually became an independent institute, which is now the Institute of Chinese Studies. So we decided to hold, in the honor of Professor Giri Deshingkar, that we will hold an annual lecture jointly, and this is the 12th lecture which we are holding today. There have been many speakers in the past, and just to name a few speakers who have delivered the lectures in the past, we had Prasenjit Duara, Hamashita Takeshi, we had Elizabeth Perry, Wang, Andrew Nathan, and last year the lecture was delivered by David Shambaug. It's my privilege to introduce to you the speaker of today's evening. We have Professor Erik Brødsgaard. Today he's going to speak. On China's Communist Party, from mass party to elite party. While a detailed introduction of Professor Brdsgaard will be given by Professor Patricia O'Brien, but just to let you know that Professor Brdsgaard is a professor at the Department of International Economics and Management, and also the Director of China Studies Program, Copenhagen Business School. He has had visiting research appointments in China, Hong Kong, Singapore, Taiwan, and USA. He has been the author and co-author and editor of large number of books. Tentatively got to know about, he has edited 30 books. Two of his recent books are Accelerated Accumulation to Socialist Market Economy in China, Economic Discourse and Development from 1952 to the present. And the another book which he recently published was Critical Readings on the Chinese Communist Party. For a detailed introduction to the speaker and to welcome you again, I would request Patricia O'Brien to kindly introduce the speaker and also take the chair. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction. I'm really very deeply honoured to be invited to be the chair of this 12th Giri Deshingkar Memorial Lecture. And I wanted to briefly begin by introducing the eponymous Mr. Giri Deshingkar to this audience, some of whom will have known him very well as colleagues, and some of whom will not. I think one finds that in Indian academic life in general, institutional memories are short, archives are few and badly kept, even of major figures and also, of course, of minor figures. Our academic life is so programmed that we're forever trying to keep abreast of the latest trends in global scholarship, that we never look backwards and think about the pioneers of a particular subject or body of work, or reassess their work, especially with reference to the Indian environment or the non-Western environment. In the field of China studies in India, Giri Deshingkar, he was born in 1932 and passed away in 2000, very prematurely. He was surely one of the pioneers in independent India. His work encompassed many, many fields from the 1960s onwards. And we should remember that this period was one of darkness for China scholars in this country, the 1980s and beyond, really, when a whole generation of well-meaning China scholars were compelled to do their academic work on China, from afar, through whatever resources they could read. Even as Western scholars were gradually managing to gain personal and institutionally enabled access to mainland China. It was also a time when the few scholars trained in China studies had to be, in this environment, all things to all people. They were known as China experts. And this was both a challenge and burden to those who were in the field. We used to call them in those days spotlight professors because of the 9:30 p.m. All India Radio little capsule on the news on the day. But that meant that the few with any competence were doing all things for all people at all times. Fortunately, given the short institutional and collective memory that I've referred to, Giri's major works were collected into a single volume. It's entitled Science and Security and Science in China and India, published in 2005, and edited by his beloved colleagues Manoranjan Mahanti and Meera Sinha Bhattacharjee. Unfortunately, she's since passed away. One might wish that this really impressive 450-page volume were better read, better disseminated, better studied, and better internalized. Again, one sometimes thinks our tendency is always to look forward or look sideways and never to look back. Let me say a little bit more about Giri and his career. He was among the few contemporary China scholars in India with a genuinely sinological background, first at the School of Oriental and African Studies in London, and subsequently at Yale University with some of the very best in the field. He had an absolutely awesome grasp of both modern and spoken and classical Chinese. His basic discipline was history, with a focus on the early Qing period and the Ming to Qing dynasty transition. But his first love was partially unfulfilled. Though his sinological background continued to inform his work, and his everyday critique of the shallowness of much of what passed for China studies in the contemporary environment, he was quickly, on his return to India, drawn into the regimen first of teaching, and then, if I might say so, seduced to CSDS to join Rajni Kothari on a UN program entitled Program on Peace and Global Transformation. He remained at CSDS until his death, and during this time, his interests shifted. His work on the Ming-Qing transition remained unfulfilled, but he became a master of the field of science and technology in China and in India, of China's military strategy and doctrines, of China's nuclear capability and security, which of course at that time was of great interest, and of India-China relations in general. In doing so, he brought a uniquely broader perspective to bear, from Chinese history and civilization to inter-Asian relations, while mastering the technical aspects of the domain of security studies. I think there are some people in this audience who have actually interacted with him in that domain. As has already been remarked, Giri was one of the few founders, maybe the Musketeers, the original Musketeers, of the China Study Group, which from 1969 used to meet on the lawns of Supper House, and in very bad weather would retreat to the room of Mr. K. Subramanyam, which was just behind the Supper House main building. And after that, following its institutionalization, he was also a director of CSDS. Giri was also the editor, the founding editor of Chung, of China Report, which he brought, our journal, which he brought into the CSDS, and later incorporated the China Studies Group as a program of CSDS. His premature death was a loss to both institutions. A bit about Giri the man, for those who didn't know him. He was extremely disciplined in every sense of the word, personally and in his work. He was very punctilious, and yet he had a sense of fun and a sort of Epicurean enjoyment of the good things of life. Every day he spent time reading the Chinese press with no other way of keeping up with his language, annotating particular articles, and maintaining a file of press clippings on India-China relations. Fortunately, we now have the internet and don't have to be burdened with all those clippings in dusty volumes. He was an absolutely brilliant editor. Many contributors were scared stiff of his blue pencil or his red pencil, and a very disciplined writer himself. He had absolutely no time for fancy prose or theoretical, what they now call funders. He'd always say, just get to the point, and sometimes people could. He was also a great cook, and particularly specialized in Chinese food. And he was a great connoisseur of his wife Sherry's wonderful Maharashtrian cooking. He had a taste for classical music, and he was brought up in a Brahmanical tradition, educated in the texts, the Indological texts of Indian civilization. In every sense of the word, Giri was a scholar and a gentleman. So this lecture series is a small tribute to Giri as a pioneer of China studies in the bad old days after 1962. As has been remarked, we've been very lucky to have many eminent speakers speaking on delivering this lecture. We now have Professor Brdsgaard, who's been partially introduced to us and is introduced on very nicely on your invitation card. Might I simply say, in addition to all these qualifications, that it's very nice to have a break from the vice-like grip of Anglo-American China studies and get a taste of European sinology and China studies at its very best. My own experience as a student, I had two professors, Swedish professors of Chinese studies, both of them great sinologists, and both of them students of the awesome linguist and philologist, Professor Bernhard Karlgren of the University of Stockholm. I'll never forget what an enlightenment a different, non-Anglo-American point of view was for a student in the far colonies of Australia. So we look forward very much to your talk on what you must have known was going to be an extremely topical theme. And we very much look forward to it, as I said. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation.
Hang on for a while, I need to find my manuscript. Well, thank you, Professor Oberoi and Director Kumar, for your very kind introduction. I must say I'm truly honored and delighted to deliver the 12th Giri Deshingkar Memorial Lecture. It is a truly distinguished list of predecessors who have delivered these lectures, including Wang, Gungwu, Andy Nathan, and last year, Speaker David Shambaug. I hope I can live up to it. It is difficult. I must say I'm pleased that I actually met Giri Deshingkar. That was in 1990 at a conference at the Center for the Study of Developing Societies. It was a wonderful conference with very insightful presentations and very lively discussions. I enjoyed the conference greatly. The day after the conference, Giri Deshingkar invited me out for dinner, and I remember him as a wonderful host. We had a very nice evening. I was deeply impressed by his sweeping knowledge of Chinese history and Chinese politics. So it's a pleasure for me and an honor to have this opportunity to give the 12th Giri Deshingkar Memorial Lecture. My topic for this lecture is China's Communist Party, and I have the undertitle From Mass Party to Elite Party. I hope I can give you a North European perspective, which is a little bit different from what you usually hear. But I also realize that there are many people here in the audience who know a lot about Chinese affairs and the Chinese Communist Party. So I'm also here to learn, I must say. And I think I probably need to keep time. So, my lecture here today will highlight the importance of, first of all, I would like to highlight the importance of studying the Chinese Communist Party, or what they say in China, the Communist Party of China, CPC. When Liu Yunshan, a couple of years ago, was visiting my university in Copenhagen, we had a conference with him and a delegation from China. He said, if you want to understand China, you need to understand the Chinese Communist Party. And I really took that to me, and I think he's right. Secondly, I will provide some data on the composition of the Chinese Communist Party of China, arguing that the party has changed from a mass party to an elite party. Third, I will introduce elite theory in discussing the role of leading party and state cadres in China. Fourth, I will argue that the CCP or the CPC is at the core of a ranking stratified system and not a class-biased system. And here I take my inspiration from Max Weber. And fifth, I am going to discuss Xi Jinping's emergence as a new strongman in China. Is he a new Mao or is he a new Deng Xiaoping? There's a lot of discussion, important discussion about that. But first I would like to provide a brief review or overview of the field of studies on the Chinese Communist Party. There are important works, and we sometimes forget that important works were already done in the 60s. And here I'm thinking of John Lewis's work on leadership in Communist China, on Franz Sherman's book, ideology and organization in China, and actually also work by Doug Barnett. These were important works, and I have just reread these works in connection with a volume I published on critical readings on the Chinese Communist Party, and I enjoyed revisiting these works. During the Cultural Revolution, attention shifted away from the Chinese Communist Party, and instead the China field focused on mass movements, on Red Guard movements, on factional struggles. In the 80s, there was a shift then to structural or bureaucratic aspects of the state functioning in China and policy making, the framework for policy making. In the early 90s, after the massacre at Tiananmen Square in June 89, focus shifted to state-society relations and what could be called centrifugal social forces. There was a belief, not totally, but many people in the China field believed that the CPC had lost legitimacy and would wither away, or simply break down, similar to what had happened in the Soviet Union. But the party did not wither away. In fact, while we were looking for disintegration of the Chinese Communist Party, of the Chinese regime, the system went through a process of rejuvenation, of revitalization. Recently, we see new doubts about the regime's sustainability, about the party's sustainability, and my good friend Shambaug is an example of that. Another good example is Minxin Pei. They are arguing that the Chinese Communist Party is in a process of decline, decay, and the end game has started. However, I'm not too sure about that. Their argument, basic argument, David Shambaug's basic argument is that there has been no reform in China since 2008, 2009, and that is maybe the case in terms of political reform. But to me, it seems that the party is able to adapt. It seems to me that it's probably not going to go away, and we have to be very careful about wishful thinking in this area. So we need to study the CPC. It's the world's biggest political party, and it is in charge of running a country that soon will overtake the US as the biggest economy in the world. So it's important to study the CPC. It's important to study how it has evolved, how it's organized, how policies are decided within the party and implemented, who are the members of this huge political machine, how are they admitted to the party, what kind of career patterns do we see, and how does the CPC run China. I think these are very important issues. In 1950, the CPC had a membership of 5.8 million people. Now it has a membership, and please take a look at this illustration, a membership of more than 89 million people. More people than any European country, even Germany, 89 million people. In the 1950, the CCP was still a mass party, and this has changed. This is no longer the case. In 1950, two-thirds of the 5.8 million members of the Chinese Communist Party were peasants and workers. Now only one-third. So there has been a change of the composition of the Chinese Communist Party, important change. New strata and groups have emerged, such as technical and management personnel. And please take a look at this figure, figure 2. In 1950, most party members were illiterate. Only 0.6% had a higher education. Now, 43% of all CCP members have a college degree or above. every year there are around 20 million applications sent to the Chinese Communist Party. And this is important when you talk about or consider a possible breakdown of the Chinese Communist Party. In the Soviet Union, when the Soviet Communist Party lost control, people were fleeing the party. That is not the case in China. You have a lot of applications every year, around 20 million actually. In the era of Hu Jintao and Wen Jiabao, the party used to admit around 2 to 3 million, most of the time 3 million new members. So there was a 15% chance of being admitted to the party if you wanted to join the party. This has been reduced to 2 million. So now there's around a 10% chance. So as a consequence, the increase of party membership has slowed down. And in 2016, the last year we had data, in 2016, the party only grew by 688,000 people. So you see this development, the increase of party membership, but then also the decrease of new, party members. It is important to note that China is not directly governed by the Chinese Communist Party rank and file. China is actually run by millions of officials in responsible positions, the so-called Gungwu or cadres. Originally, and this is important because when you discuss the concept of cadres in China, there's a lot of confusion. Even officials, even those who are considered Gungwu, cadres, they have difficulties defining what is actually a cadre in China. For Lenin, of course, if you look at his organization manual from 1902, what is to be done, for Lenin, cadres were the vanguard of the revolutionary movement. That was clear to him and the early, communists. In China, there's been some kind of regularization of the concept. And in the 50s, for example, cadres were defined on the basis of their job category as management and specialist technical personnel in public and collective enterprises, as well as staff and administrative organs at all levels. So how many are there of these Gungwu? Well, according to available data, and we don't have much information on that because this is considered internal NABU, but according to the information that is available, there are around 42 million cadres in China. And I have some statistics on the 40.5 million people that we had at the end of the 90s. Less than half of these cadres are actually members of the Chinese Communist Party. But when you move up the ladder, when you move up this pyramid, they increasingly become party members. Of the leading cadres, 96% are members of the Chinese Communist Party. The leading cadres are not that many in China. They are defined as cadres at county or division level, and you only have 508,000 of these in China. And then the next level is the bureau level or G level, 34,000. Next level, ministerial level or Bu level, 2,562. And then at the top, the core leaders, 888. At the ministerial level, they are 100%, almost 100% party members, except for one, the Minister of Science and Technology. All the rest are party members. And if you are not a party member, you do not control your ministry, because then you cannot be the party secretary of the party organization in your ministry, and that person has the power. It's important to note that these cadres, these Gungwu, they are increasingly better educated, they are younger than during Mao's time, and that is one of, I think, the explanations why China has done so well also in the economic field. In 1950, 6.9% of all cadres in China had a higher education. Now it's around 46.5%. So they are increasingly better and better educated. Among leading cadres, the cadres from county level, division level and up, 81% have a higher education. Among bureau level cadres and up, 88%. And if you take a look at the Central Committee, you'll find that 95 to 96% of them have a higher education. Now we can, of course, discuss, educational degrees in China. I know there's a lot of evidence of fake degrees, governors taking PhDs, while they're busy running their provinces and so on. So there is a discussion here, but there's no doubt that in general, the cadre corps in China is better educated than during Mao's time, younger and better educated. And you see here the change appears in 1985. They are significantly younger. In 1979, 28% were below 35 years of age. And recent data shows around 50%. The ranking system is extremely important in China. It indicates formal authority as well as salary and benefits. It is the core of the system, the ranking system. It consists of 27 ranks and 14 degrees. Or 14 grades, actually. Rank 15 and above are leading cadres. And this is the salary scale. I hope you can see it, because here you see these 27 ranks from office worker all the way up to state leader level. And you will also see that these salaries are actually quite low. But they have been increased recently, 100% at the bottom and 62% at the top, but still comparatively low salaries actually for the state president in China and the prime minister, and they certainly do not compare with the salaries they get in Singapore. But then there are benefits, of course, if you are at the top of this ranking system. Benefit in terms of housing, vice ministerial level cadres, they have access to apartments of around 220 square meters. So vice ministers and ministers, 220 to 240 square meters. Most of them live in Guangzhou, the western part of China, or Beijing. I've been there to see one of those apartments. Very nice apartments. Huge, big apartments in a very nice area. Cars are also depends on your rank. If you're a minister, you have access to a car with an engine of 3.0 liter. If you're a vice minister, 2.5. Director General, 2.0. This is still a big car in Denmark. Mine is only 1.6. Traveling is also specified according to your rank. Ministerial level cadres travel first class, vice ministers and director generals business class. Office space is also tightly regulated. Ministerial level cadres they are entitled to an office of 54 square meters, vice ministers 42 square meters, director generals 24 square meters. For some reason, county heads have a big office of 30 square meters, higher than the director general. So they must have more space out in the countryside. These cadres have access to special hospitals. So this ranking system is extremely important. And when you look at, for example, these leading small groups that are coordinating policies in China, and they're very, very important, and they're usually headed by certainly a Politburo member, mostly a standing committee member, standing committee of the Chinese Communist Party Politburo. The relationship between these leading small groups primarily defined by the rank of their leader. leadership or leadership rank is extremely important, and the Chinese are very much aware of this. They will rank you. When I visit China, they will rank you. What is your rank compared to our system? That is difficult to tell them because Denmark is such an egalitarian society. So the power elite in China, and there is a power elite, and it's a power elite in Anthony Giddens' definition of the term. Xi Jinping also talks about the power elite. He talked about the key minority, the Guanjian Xiaoshu, and this has become a hot topic in China, a Rezi. And an important part of this power elite is actually, of course, the top leaders, but also county leaders. They are also quite important. So this is a ranking stratified system, and following important work by Eyal, Shelony, and Townsley, I would define capitalism as a class stratified system in which economic capital dominates. And then communism is a rank stratified society where social capital, institutionalized capital, political capital is a major source of power and prestige. So the CCP or the CPC is the main social and political force creating and maintaining such a system, such a society based on ranking order. And this is, of course, to the benefit of the leading cadres in the system. So how do you make it to the elite? This is very important. If the elite is running China, governing China, ruling China, then it's important, of course, to make it to the elite. And that is very, very difficult. Only 4.4% of all section members, Kerr level, section level in China, make it to the elite county level, the true level, the county division level. Only 4.4% of all these millions of section members in the cadre corps. Only 1% of them have a chance to make it further up to G level, to the Director General level. So there's a huge lack of opportunities for promotion. And in China, there's a debate about this, and they realize this is a problem. So there are recent regulations that stipulate if you have been stuck in a position for 12 years without promotion, then you get the benefits of the next higher position. Not the rank, but the benefit. This system also covers SOE executives. Executives in the big state-owned enterprises, they are part of the elite, an important part of the elite. CEOs, board chairmen, board secretaries of the large state-owned enterprises, the central enterprises, Zhongyang企业, they are not appointed by their board, they are appointed by the Central Organization Department of the Chinese Communist Party. These people at that level, they rotate among business, party, state positions. So you can be head of a big company for a few years, and then they rotate you to become vice party secretary or vice governor or even governor in one of the provinces. And I have some examples here. For example, Xiao Yaqing, he used to be head of China Aluminium Corporation. He was the one who was negotiating with Rio Tinto about a big investment, 20% investment that fell through. After that, year after that, he was appointed to the position as Vice Secretary General of the State Council. And a few years ago, he was then moved to head SASA, the ministerial level organization that manages the big state-owned enterprises. So he moved from business to state and government. Ma Xingwei was president of China Aerospace. Then in 2013, he was appointed vice minister in the Ministry of Science and Technology. Half a year later, he was transferred to Guangdong to become vice party secretary of Guangdong province and party secretary of Shenzhen. And recently, he was appointed governor of Guangdong province. So he moved from business to government to party. Jiang used to be head of China Northern Industries. Then he was moved to Chongqing to become deputy mayor. A couple of years later, he was appointed mayor, and now he was recently moved to Tianjin to become mayor of Tianjin. Jiang Qingwei is a really good example of moving from business to government to party, and maybe back. Some of them also moved back. In 2007, he moved. He was also used to be head of China Aerospace. He then became minister of the Commission for Industry and Science for Defense. When that was merged with Ministry of Information and Industry, he was moved to head the new company to develop a Chinese civil aircraft. In 2011, he was moved back to government to become governor of Hebei province, and recently he was moved to Heilongjiang to become party secretary of Heilongjiang. So they moved back and forth at that elite level, and the most obvious example is, of course, Zhou Yongkan, who was head of CNPC, the big oil company, general manager until 1998. Then he was moved to Beijing to become Minister of Land and Resources. Year after, he became Party Secretary of Sichuan Province. 2002, back to Beijing to become Minister of Public Security. And he ended up in the Standing Committee in 2007 to head during Faraway, the Commission for Legal and Political Affairs, controlling all security affairs in China. So he's probably the best example of this rotation system. The French call it pantouflage. You also see it in Japan, Amakodai system in Japan. But there they move from government to business. They don't move back. In China, they can move back and forth. Of course, you also have revolving doors in the US. But in my country, in Scandinavian countries, you don't see this system. So they are clearly part of the elite. They have, in fact, vice ministerial status, these business leaders. Also, while they are heading these big businesses, they have administrative rank, and they have high pay. They actually have higher pay than the people working in government positions. Anthony Giddens, he distinguishes between open and closed elites. The Chinese elite has a relatively open pattern of recruitment and a high level of integration, and can, in Anthony Giddens' term, be called a solidary elite. It's an elite that holds autocratic power. This does not mean that it is the only elite in China. You also have private entrepreneurs, increasingly very rich private entrepreneurs. According to a Hurun report, you have at least 17,000 entrepreneurs in China holding assets worth more than 500 million renminbi. You have more than 5,000 holding assets worth 1 to 2 billion renminbi. You have more than 300 holding assets worth more than 10 billion renminbi. Actually, China now has more dollar billionaires than the US. China now has 772 dollar billionaires, US 579. Total assets of these super rich people is 10 times the GDP of Norway. So the CPC, the Chinese Communist Party, is trying to co-opt these people, co-opt them. And in 2001, Jiang Zemin actually had this formulation of the 3 representations, and that was also about co-opting these people, working together with them. So they are invited to meetings of the National People's Congress and to meetings of the Chinese Political Consultative Conference. This shows a relatively open pattern of elite recruitment in China. However, none of these people, none of this economic elite is member of the Central Committee and have formal state or party rank. None of them. And this is what qualifies to become member of the elite in China, a member of the political elite in China. So China remains a party-directed, ranking stratified society, even though you see the emergence of these entrepreneurs. It's not enough to have money in China. It's not enough to be rich if you want to make it to the political elite. Well, let me talk about the current situation. Some people argue that Xi is the strongest Chinese leader since Deng Xiaoping. He's certainly chairman of everything. He's Secretary General, he is President, he was just re-elected, of the People's Republic of China. He's chairman of the Central Military Commission. He's, since the 6th plenum in 2016, has been the core of the Chinese Communist Party. He's been named the core of the Chinese Communist Party, He has his name written into the constitution, not just the party constitution, but also the state constitution. Xi Jinping's thought of Chinese socialism with Chinese characteristics for the new era. That's the formulation which is in both the party constitution and the state constitution. He's probably the strongest Chinese leader since Deng Xiaoping. So he has been compared to Deng Xiaoping, but actually his policies and his ruling style is different from Deng Xiaoping. There are certainly two main differences. First of all, Xi Jinping insists on acquiring formal posts. He will not allow colleagues to formally outrank him. And this is different from Deng Xiaoping. He ruled informally. Deng Xiaoping never took top position as head of a party or prime minister or president. He still had the power, but he never had to underline this by taking the formal top positions. Deng Xiaoping also rarely participated in meetings. He would often send his secretary. So in that sense, Xi Jinping is different from Deng Xiaoping. Xi Jinping micromanages everything, being head of all these small leading groups. He also has a different view of the role of the party than Deng Xiaoping. Deng Xiaoping argued for the separation of party and government. Deng Xiaoping said in 1980, the party organization neither equals the government nor organs of state power. The method of the party ruling everything is wrong. And this was said in 1980. So separation of party and government was very important, an important discussion in the 80s, and certainly in Jiao Ziyang's report to the 13th Party Congress in 1987. There was a very lively debate about this in China in the 80s, and here he talked in the People's Daily talked in 1987, 1988. After 89, this discussion about the separation of party and government disappeared, certainly from People's Daily, but also from other Chinese media, magazines, newspapers. From 2000, you get a new important concept, and that is, it's difficult to translate. I translate it as bidirectional entrance overlapping posts. Chinese is Shuang Ru, Jin Ru, Jiao Cha, Ren Zhi. Bidirectional entrance overlapping posts. What does that mean? It means that leading party and government positions should be combined in one person. For example, the party secretary in a locality should concurrently serve as chairman of the local People's Congress, and the mayor should serve as vice party secretary. And it also operates in business, so that, and I'll return to that, but it also operates there in the sense that the party committees, party secretary in a big company should also serve as the chairman of the board, if there is a board, and normally there is in state-owned enterprises. So you have this bidirectional entrance and overlapping both in both government and in business. And you also in business, you no longer see this notion of separation of government and enterprises, which they were discussing in the 80s, the Zhengqi. So the ambidexterity you saw in the 80s, I think that Deng Xiaoping's political reforms created an ambidextrous political system. And by ambidexterity, I mean the ability to use one's hands equally well. In the SOE sector, does that mean I'm running out of time?
I don't know what it means.
In the SOE sector, this was a key ability. You could have your business functions, but at the same time, work in the party and state cadres, both sort of government position, but at the same time they had their party links. This is disappearing, this ambidexterity in China. At the 6th plenary session in 2016, Wang introduced the concept of division of labor, not division or separation of party and government, division of labor between party and government. And it was explicitly said that there is no such thing as separation between party and government, there's only division of functions. So party and government institutions and organs may perform different functions, but the division of functions is determined by the party which remains in control. And it was clearly said, actually, that following this plenum, Chinese media acknowledged that this is different from Deng Xiaoping's line. So what you see in China today is a development trajectory where Deng Xiaoping's formulations, policy line, no longer apply. So you have this bidirectional entrance overlapping posts expressing actually the hegemony of the party. So it's not just CPC-led governance, it's a unitary system headed by a hegemonic party. It is the parties taking over the state. That is the situation, that is the development you see in China today, and I hope this illustrates that. Illustrates the party morphing into the state, actually. No separation. There are lots of new regulations. It's really interesting to follow all the new regulations being published in China these days. New regulations for selecting and appointing leading cadres, for example. New regulations for disciplinary work. New regulations for promoting and demoting cadres, leading cadres, where there is a focus for the first time on demotion procedures. Regulation for supervision and evaluation. Regulation for establishing party cells, which is very important. This is a campaign going on in China today, that all organizations need party cells, should have party cells, not just government offices, bureaus, SOEs, but also private companies and joint ventures. Associated with this, you have a campaign for better quality cadres. There's a clear focus on quality rather than quantity, and that is why that you see a decrease in the amount of members being admitted to the party. So recent developments, you see Xi Jinping being written into the constitution. They observed at the 19th Party Congress the unwritten rule about 68 down, 67 up. Wang stepped down, no longer member of the Central Committee, and we all drew a sigh of relief. They are following the unwritten rules. Its institutionalization is still going on. But then we had the recent National People's Congress, and here Wang Zishan came back. He's back now as vice president and a new strong vice president, and he will continue to work together with Xi Jinping. You have a new supervision commission, merging actually the party's Central Discipline and Inspection Committee with the Ministry of Supervision. And it was thought that this new supervision commission under the National People's Congress would take over all anti-corruption work in China. As also cover anti-corruption work, not just in the party, but also among officials. But now we see that the new head of that commission is not Zhao Leji in the standing committee, who is head of the Central Discipline and Inspection Committee. No, it's Yang Xiaodu, who's a member of the Politburo, yes, but he's actually the number 2. He's a deputy of Zhao Leji, and that clearly underlines that the party will still be in control in this area. And you have other examples of this. The party is everywhere. And that was also said by Xi Jinping in the 19th, in his report to the 19th Party Congress in November last year. He said that the party exercises overall leadership over all areas of endeavor in every part of the country. So the CPC is strengthening, in the process of strengthening and centralizing its grip over Chinese society. Xi Jinping is the undisputed leader of this state party. And he can, in principle, stay beyond 2023 if he wants to. Wang Zishan, his vice president, can, in principle, also stay on beyond 2023. Some people say that this is not just a reflection of strength, it's also a reflection of weakness. And you have the economists naming Xi Jinping the world's most powerful man. Well, the jury is out. Is it a sign of strength? Is it a sign of weakness? I think it's probably primarily a sign of strength. And the media in China is really focusing on Xi Jinping's new role. You know, he's here, front page of People's Daily. You look to the left, usually for the past 25 years, there's, you know, when you have these leadership changes in China, usually you both have the number 1 and the number 2, or you have the number 1 and the outgoing number 1. But now it's Xi Jinping. And that reminds us of Mao. You know, the same way, he's depicted the same way, you know, in the Chinese media. Not as Deng Xiaoping, but as Mao, actually. What you have in China is actually, let me go to the conclusion. But let me first say that there is an iron triangle in China, which, as far as I can see, it is the heart of the beast. If you break that iron triangle, you'll have regime change. So you have the party, you have business, and you have state, and there's circulation, rotation, you know, among these points, you know, and they're depending on each other. And that's why it's so difficult to implement reform in China. It's so difficult to implement SOE reform, for example, which I promised so many times. Also in the document from November 2013 at the important third plenary session. They cannot really introduce SOE reform because they would break the iron triangle. What happened to my conclusion? Well, then I would have to read it. After I think there have been 2 decades of neglect of the Chinese Communist Party, study of the Chinese Communist Party, but it has again become a very important part of contemporary China research. It's difficult to study the Chinese Communist Party. It's difficult to study because there's a lack of statistical material. I mean, statistical material that allows us to, for example, do real elite studies of the Communist Party of China, especially, studies of the card of core. So that is something that limits our work on the Chinese Communist Party. Another limitation is there's too much focus on China on its own terms, and too little application of social science concepts and social science theory. And thirdly, I think our research on the Communist Party of China is hampered by the fact that a lot of us, that there is a tendency among Chinese scholars to want the Chinese Communist Party to disappear, to wither away. They don't want it there. And that, I think, is really influencing the field. But the party is still there. It has undergone a process of rejuvenation, a process of revitalization. It has moved from a mass party to an elite party. You have a cadre core of highly educated cadres, younger cadres than during Mao's time. You have a focus on bureaucratic quality rather than quantity. And you have the maintenance of a ranking system. Xi Jinping may be compared to Mao, but he's different from Mao in the sense that he is not out to destroy the bureaucracy. He's not out to destroy the party. He wants to strengthen the bureaucracy. He wants to strengthen the party. I think that in order to understand Chinese politics, it's imperative to study the Chinese Communist Party and how it controls society, how it controls the bureaucracy, how it controls the economy. And we must work to understand the inner logic, the inner organizational logic of this party, using, if we can, general social science theory. In order to translate, China knowledge maybe into a comparative framework, because we have this difficulty in how to understand China. Do we understand China on its own terms, as some people would say, or do we really need to translate it into our own, value system, our own theories? And that is a general dilemma. But I thank you for your patience, and my talk is over. Thank you very much.